Hello, Euro nerds, and welcome to this fairly short Edpuzzle on the Kingdom of Spain under King Philip II. So let's get through this. Here we go. Philip II is arguably one of the most famous kings in Spanish history. His legacy, both Catholic-wise and architecturally, is pretty significant. We're going to talk briefly about the palace, sort of ish, kind of, slash monastery that he builds just outside of Madrid that I recommend visiting if you ever do go to Spain. But overall, his impact that will be focused here is on Catholicism and combating Protestantism in Spanish territories. All right, so before we get to Philip II, we have to talk about his father, Charles V, who we know very well at this point in the course. We know Charles V was not only Holy Roman Emperor, but also King of Spain, and we also know that he was dealing with a bunch of different issues, whether they were the expansion of the Ottoman Empire into Central and Southern Europe, which is Holy Roman Empire land, or dealing with Martin Luther's growing Protestantism, or also dealing with the French and the Habsburg-Valois wars. He had a lot of problems, couldn't really solve any of them, and he will eventually retire. And here again is the key. Again, this should be review for us. The Schmalkaldic Wars is really going to be a turning point for Charles V. So the Holy Roman Emperor loses the Schmalkaldic Wars, sues for peace, and the deal is Lutheranism or Catholicism in the individual states of the Holy Roman Empire. The Peace of Augsburg, which states that, ultimately decreases the power of the Holy Roman Emperor, and that is key. So once Charles took the L there, he is going to retire from both of his positions. So Charles abdicated both of his thrones. He's no longer Holy Roman Emperor. He is no longer King of Spain. So abdication is when a monarch gives up their throne. So his empire has now been divided between eventually his brother and his son. So Charles retires to a monastery. Why he doesn't go to the coast of Spain overlooking the Mediterranean, I'm not sure, but he decided to go to a monastery and pray for the rest of his life. So he eventually dies shortly after the end of the Schmalkaldic Wars. All right, goodbye, Charles. So, as I mentioned, his brother will be elected Holy Roman Emperor. So basically, we're now going to see two versions of Habsburgs in Europe. We will have the Austrian Habsburg, so really the seat of power of the Holy Roman Empire at this point now is Vienna, Austria, which is the current capital of Austria. So we have the Austrian Habsburgs, and then the Kingdom of Spain went to his son, Philip II, and now we will have the Spanish Habsburgs. So now we basically see a division in the Habsburg family, Spanish Habsburgs, Austrian Habsburgs. Get the point, I think. Okay, Philip II is also going to be known for changing the capital city of Spain. Historically, it used to be in a town called Toledo, which is a really cool mountainside town in central part of Spain today. It's actually kind of like the capital of sword and knife making in Europe. It's really neat. But he moves it to a new city, at least new at the time, Madrid. So if you go to Madrid today, there's a lot of impact of Philip II because he quite literally helped build Madrid. Beyond that, so we know Philip II will also gain not only Spain, he will gain all of the territories that are in the Spanish New, well, I should say New Spain in the new quote-unquote world. So think of a good portion of South America, Central America, some parts of Southern North America as well. Additionally, as we've covered in class, the Netherlands is controlled by Spain, and also portions of southern Italy here, Naples and Sicily. All right. So, Philip II, the guy is through and through a Spaniard. His father, Charles V, was actually born in a Flemish city, and the Spanish Netherlands was actually more accepting of Charles V. But because Philip II was through and through a Spaniard, that already creates a rift between Philip II and the Spanish Netherlands. Yes, he was the guy who was married to Bloody Mary for a short period of time before Bloody Mary dies of some version of cancer. And we already know to associate Philip II with a fanatical, zealous version of Catholicism. He's going to be one of the political leaders of the Catholic Counter-Reformation we've covered in class as well. So always associate with Philip II with zealous, fanatical Catholicism. Moving on. This should also have been covered in our exploration notes. So just note how Spain ran their colonies. They used something called the encomienda system, which was a version of having plantations. It also is connected to the Spanish social hierarchy system, where they used enslaved labor of both indigenous people and then eventually enslaved West Africans. And again, the idea of the slave trade was that they use a Spanish word called the asiento. So if you see the word asiento, it means whichever country controls the slave trade. And initially it was Spain, and eventually the British will actually ended up in control of the asiento. So those are just some vocab words that you might have seen, but we're going to continue along. Where does Spain get out of their colonies? They are predominantly interested in God, glory, gold, and especially for the monetary value of hard currency like gold and silver. All right, so as we recall, an earlier portion of the course, we had Ferdinand and Isabella, who forced the remaining Muslims and Jews in Spain to convert to Catholicism. They either had to convert or leave. People who converted were given new names. So if it was a former Muslim who then converted to Christianity, they're called a Morisco. If they were formerly a Jew and then converted to Christianity, Catholicism, of course, they'd be called a Marano. So those are some terms that I've honestly not seen come up on the AP exam, but just some things to note because we are talking about Spanish history after all. All right. Additionally, Spielvogel talks about the size and the ability of the Spanish military in Chapter 2. So in Chapter 2, we can associate Spain with having initially one of the strongest militaries in the world, right around the 16th century, earlier 16th century. And they had an extremely large navy. It actually dwarfed the English Navy at this point. Land army-wise, they had a very well-equipped, well-trained, and also pretty ferocious style of fighting. Like their soldiers were quite fanatical. So when they were faced off with an enemy on land, it often turned into some pretty bloody combat. So not only will that be useful for Spain fighting in Europe, that will also be useful for Spain fighting in their colonial possessions, especially in South America. All right, this is just something just kind of cool to know. If you ever travel to Spain, you should be familiar with the famous palace/monastery that Philip II built. It's called El Escorial, which pretty much translates as a slag heap in Spanish. And essentially, Philip II wants to build like a personal royal residence that also served as a monastery, and will also become the resting place for future Spanish kings. So if you ever look at an aerial view of El Escorial, it's in like a grill pattern, and it was dedicated to St. Lawrence, a Christian martyr, who was grilled alive by the Romans. And allegedly, when St. Lawrence was being grilled, he told his executioners, "Hey, can you turn me over? I'm done on this side." So El Escorial is actually dedicated to St. Lawrence, and the architecture is actually laid out in a grill-like fashion, at least from the aerial view. So Escorial, even though it's a royal palace, it is going to look very different than like Louis XIV's Palace of Versailles. It is meant to look like a monastery. It's pretty austere. It's not meant to look like glorious. It's huge and immense, but it's not meant to be like a palace per se. It's a monastery first and foremost, and it makes sense because Philip II was so stinking Catholic. It also actually holds one of the largest collections of Christian relics in the entire world. It's still, a lot of them are actually still in there to the very day if you ever go visit El Escorial, which I highly recommend doing. So remember, relics are like some type of connection to often a martyred Christian saint. Sometimes it could be like a piece of fabric that has blood stain on it. Some people, they could say it's like from Jesus's crucifixion, things like that. Those are all forms of relics. Philip II, he built his personal bedchamber literally right above the altar in the actual church that's inside of El Escorial, just to give you an idea of how Catholic he really was. He wanted to roll out of bed and immediately go pray downstairs. All right, that's a very long video that we're not going to watch. Okay, we're going to see rebellions against Philip II based on religion. Honestly, this one is not super important, so I'm just going to continue right along. This section I did talk about in another Edpuzzle. Just note that the Spanish Empire will be on a continual decline really after the Spanish Armada is defeated in 1588. But economically speaking, the Spanish Empire's decline is also connected to this price revolution, where the inflation rate in Spain is increasing to the point where it actually will cause an economic downturn. And that's connected with the defeat of the Spanish Armada as well. And basically, Spain will be on this gradual decline to kind of like a second-rate European power. So just connect price revolution to the slow decline of Spain's economic supremacy. All right, now we get to some pretty new stuff. Spanish, Netherlands, and the Dutch revolt. So there's actually a few names for this historical event. Most common one I've seen is the Dutch revolt. I've also seen the term the 80 Years' War, because guess how long the Dutch are revolting against Spain? Yeah, 80 years. So, all right, the Spanish Netherlands, officially controlled by Spain, and it makes up a few different modern-day countries. It's, of course, the Netherlands, also makes up modern-day Belgium, and parts of Luxembourg. So, economically speaking, this area became pretty stinking wealthy because look at their location. They're right in Northern Europe on the coast. So of course they're going to be major trading centers. Amsterdam, Antwerp, Rotterdam. These are the areas where they have ports. That kind of makes sense. So language-wise, in the northern parts, which will be modern-day Netherlands, they will speak Dutch, which is like a dialect of German. Then, if you go to Belgium, Belgium is kind of split into a few different areas. You have the area called Wallonia, and Wallonia, they speak a dialect of French called Walloon, and there's also a part of Belgium called Flanders where they speak a dialect of Dutch called Flemish. So Belgium overall is going to be more Catholic. So this area here, so like the southern part of the Spanish Netherlands, which is modern-day Belgium and Luxembourg, are going to be more Catholic. But then as you go north into the modern-day Netherlands, that's going to be more Calvinists, therefore Protestant. So north, Protestant, southern part of the Spanish Netherlands, like right here, is going to be more Catholic. All right. So, this Dutch revolt, once again, is it going to be religious? Yes. Once again, is it going to be political? Yes. You can't remove those two. They're always intertwined in this period of time. So, politically speaking, the administrators in the Spanish Netherlands, and a lot of them being nobles, weren't a huge fan of Philip II because Philip II was a Spaniard through and through. They viewed the Spanish as foreigners in the Spanish Netherlands. Some of them, not all of them. And that's different than Philip II's father, who was born in Flanders. So they view Philip II kind of like as this foreign occupier. Additionally, Philip II makes an oops. He needs money. He starts revoking some of the traditional feudal privileges of the Dutch nobility, meaning they had limited taxes, they could make their own laws. Philip II's taking a heavier hand on the Spanish nobility. He's taxing them now. He's having a more centralized control over them. How does that make the nobility feel? Not great. They want to have more autonomy over the Netherlands, and Philip II is doing quite the opposite there. Religiously speaking, I already mentioned it. The northern part of the Spanish Netherlands is converting to Calvinism, a version of Calvinism. And Philip II is a fanatical Catholic. That right there is bad news bears. But the southern provinces of the Spanish Netherlands will largely remain Catholic. Even today, Belgium is like close to 90% Catholic to the very day. All right, so the leader of the Dutch revolt will eventually be this guy, William the Silent. So let's get in here. All right. So Philip II recognizes there is growing Calvinism in the Spanish Netherlands, so what does he do? He sends in the Spanish Inquisition, meant to root out these heretics. And when he does that, what happens? The Dutch nobility start revolting against Philip II because they believe that's a violation of their autonomy, their own self-control. So Calvinists start destroying some examples of Catholicism. Philip II doesn't want to see Catholic Church burnt to the ground, sends in more troops. It's going to get bloody pretty stinking quick. So the Dutch need a leader, and this is their leader. They look to the most powerful noble house in the Netherlands, and it was the House of Orange. And the person who leads the House of Orange is called the Prince of Orange. Yes, their symbol is in fact the orange. Why? Don't ask me. So William the Silent becomes this new leader of this anti-Spanish movement. He's kind of like the face of the Dutch revolt, at least until his death. So now Philip II needs to respond to these revolting Dutch. He sends in an enforcer. Think of like mafia who needs to like teach someone a lesson. This is the Spanish king's equivalent. He sends in the Duke of Alba, a fanatical, zealous Spanish Catholic who has basically complete control to do whatever means necessary to crush Protestant revolt, also known as the Dutch Revolt. So he has creates something called the Council of Blood, where it's kind of like an extrajudicial means of execution, and overall, Protestant blood is being spilt in much higher numbers. But here's the thing, when you take such a heavy-handed way of crushing a revolt, oftentimes you're actually increasing the animosity directed towards your control. So now this rift in the Netherlands becomes super pronounced. So those northern provinces, which we would call today the Netherlands, is now breaking apart even more so. They decided to rename themselves. The northern provinces call themselves the United Provinces of the Netherlands. Total honesty, if you just say the Netherlands at this point, I would be okay. I'm okay with that. But the official name was the United Provinces. So they break apart, which would be like kind of this area right here. And that's going to be led by William the Silent under the House of Orange. And overall, we're going to find in the Netherlands, it actually will eventually be one of the most religiously tolerant areas in all of Europe eventually. But it's going to take a little bit of time. Those southern provinces, they remained under Spanish control because they've historically been much more Catholic than the north. So now the Spanish Netherlands are experiencing this rift. So overall, the details, frankly, aren't that important. In some cases, the Catholics are winning. In some cases, the Dutch Protestants are winning. And an important moment occurs when Philip takes the L in the Spanish Armada. That sets him back. That sets him back quite a bit. He eventually will sue for peace, and there will be an initial peace between the Dutch Protestants and the Spanish Netherlands. But the key to the end of the Dutch Revolt will be the 30 Years' War. So to speed up, the Dutch Revolt will eventually be ended when Spain loses the 30 Years' War, and part of the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War, is that it eventually granted the Netherlands independent country status. So because of the 30 Years' War, the Dutch Revolt is successful, where you now have a country, independent country called the Netherlands, which was largely a Calvinist country. And that happens in 1648. So that's the official end of the Dutch Revolt, 30 Years' War. The Netherlands is an independent country. And that's the end of the 80 Years' War. All right, Spanish Armada, I've already covered. I am not going to do it again, so we'll skip through this. And folks, that's it. I told you it'd be a short one. Thanks for listening. Bye.